Hey guys, tonight we drift gently through a sky thick with mist, where constellations flicker like old lanterns and the stars hum with ancient gossip. Your feet land softly on what appears to be a marble floor made entirely of polished thunderclouds. You've arrived at the gates of Mount Olympus, home of the gods, seat of divine power, and currently a disaster daycare. In the distance, someone screams, not a warrior cry or a dramatic curse, but the shriek of a god baby turning into a flock of doves mid-tantrum. You wander closer. A tiny whirlwind zips past your leg. A golden rattle floats by, smoking lightly. And at the center of it all, Zeus, towering, majestic, beard glistening with dew, and the faint scent of citrus-scented lightning. He's spinning in circles, trying to catch a toddler with 6 arms and a trident. Whose child is this? He bellows, as if the answer isn't obvious. This, dear listener, is the king of the gods in full parental crisis mode. He rules the skies. He commands storms. But right now, he's knee-deep in immortal children and can't remember who turned the palace swimming pool into a portal to the underworld. You probably won't survive this, unless you're wearing enchanted sandals, fluent in god-baby babble, and immune to the effects of divine mischief. But you'll enjoy the chaos anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fun to see this sleepy little corner of YouTube stretching across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stroll into the main hall of Olympus. The pillars are trimmed in gold, the ceiling made of cloud glass, and the floor is sticky with ambrosia thanks to someone's failed attempt at immortal pudding. To your left, a harp plays itself mournfully. To your right, a tiny goat is trying to file taxes. Zeus pinches the bridge of his nose, sighs dramatically, and waves his hand. A minor god of houseplants appears and bows. Your children, Zeus growls, are multiplying again. This is not the image the myths usually give us. Zeus, mighty ruler, heroic king, unstoppable lovers. Zeus, absent-minded dad who cannot remember which of his children is currently shape-shifting into a giant bee. Surprisingly accurate. You make your way through the nursery wing, where a group of nymphs are trying to herd a crawling infant who leaves vines in his wake. One nymph turns to you and says, he says his name is Pan, but yesterday he was calling himself Steve. You keep moving. Zeus is not a villain, exactly. But he's not exactly father of the millennium either. Despite his throne, his power, and his fondness for romantic escapades that often lead to unexpected offspring, he never really nails the parenting part. His children range from major gods to barely mentioned forest sprites, and he's equally unreliable with all of them. Historians still argue whether this pattern of divine neglect reflected Greek ideals of masculinity, or if it was just the poets being passive-aggressive. Either way, the result is a generation of demigods, gods, and problem children raised more by circumstances than by Zeus himself. You spot a small scroll pinned to a pillar, Olympian childcare sign-up sheet. Every name has been crossed out. At the bottom, someone's added an angry script, "We need a new system." And still, Zeus carries on. Occasionally proud, often confused, and always surprised when one of his children shows up with questions like, "Who am I?" or "Why do I shoot light from my fingers?" There's a fringe myth whispered by lesser-known storytellers that Zeus once tried to organize a family reunion. It ended when Dionysus spiked the nectar, Athena challenged everyone to a logic contest, and Apollo wrote a moody song about it. You pass a giant playroom, where a group of young gods are reenacting the Trojan War using figs, helmets, and goats. In the corner, a statue of Zeus weeps actual thunder. One child pokes it and says, "Daddy never visits." There's a quiet tragedy tucked into the comedy here. For all his grandeur, Zeus isn't really close to any of his kids. They revere him, fear him, occasionally fight for his favor, but few seem to know him. And in the end, Mount Olympus might be the most gilded example of what happens when a family is ruled, not raised. The headache begins with a soft crackle, like static across the sky. You follow the sound down a polished corridor, lined with tapestries that shimmer between centuries. The air grows tense, thick with divine pressure, as you round the corner and find Zeus seated on a throne of storm clouds, groaning like a man who's just eaten questionable goat stew. Except this isn't indigestion. It's divine cranial labor. Zeus clutches his head, muttering. It's like someone's knocking from the inside with a spear. His temples glow faintly. Several Olympian onlookers back away, except for Hephaestus, the god of forge and blunt solutions, who walks up casually holding a hammer the size of a watermelon. You think maybe he's here to offer tea or a forehead massage. He is not. One firm crack of the hammer later, Zeus's skull splits like an overripe pomegranate, and out bursts Athena, fully armored, eyes sharp as obsidian. No crying, no goo, just a steely gaze and a sword pointed dramatically at the sky. The other gods blink. One drops his ambrosia. Apollo mutters, so that's where the war helmet went. This is how Athena is born, not from a mother's womb, but from her father's skull, with a war cry and an attitude that says, don't you dare talk down to me. She doesn't toddle or crawl. She strategizes. The poets love this origin story, not just for the drama, but for the symbolism. Athena represents wisdom and reason, concepts that, for the Greeks, often came through struggle, pain, or at the very least, a splitting headache. And what better metaphor than Zeus birthing his most intelligent child via brain explosion? Historians still argue whether this myth was meant to elevate intellect above emotion, or just a convenient way to explain why Athena didn't have a mother. Technically, she did. Metis, the goddess of wisdom, whom Zeus swallowed while pregnant. Yes, you heard that right. He ate her. Moving on, you trail after Athena as she steps boldly into Olympus, already surveying her surroundings like she's planning a renovation. The satyr offers her a welcome scroll. She declines. I'll write my own, she says, and invents law instead. Zeus, meanwhile, is dabbing at his forehead and asking if anyone else hears a faint buzzing sound. Parenting Athena is, let's say, low maintenance for Zeus. She doesn't need him. Doesn't beg for attention. Doesn't flood villages when she's bored. She simply becomes one of the most respected and competent deities on Olympus, with minimal input from Dad. You wander into her temple later that day. It smells of olive oil, parchment, and silent judgment. Owls perch in the rafters, blinking slowly at you like disappointed librarians. There's a desk carved from moonstone, covered in blueprints for new city plans. Athens, yes, that Athens, is in progress. Zeus, to his credit, does seem proud, in his own distant way. He names her his favorite, occasionally consults her on war strategy, and lets her borrow the Aegis, a terrifying magical shield with a snake border and the face of Medusa on it. The divine equivalent of handing your kid the keys to a tank. Still, you notice Zeus never quite connects with her. Athena is all logic and cool efficiency. Zeus is mostly thunder, passion, and erratic bursts of affection. Their conversations are brief and practical. She says, the Trojans are planning something. He says, should I throw a lightning bolt at them? She sighs. There's a quiet respect between them, but not much warmth. Athena might be Zeus's most successful child, but also his most distant. The kind of kid who builds an empire and forgets to send a holiday scroll. One fringe scholar once suggested that Athena's perfection made Zeus nervous, that she reminded him too much of Metis, the wife he feared would outwit him, which is why he swallowed her in the first place. Parenting guilt with a side of destiny anxiety. Classic Olympus. You peek out the temple window and see Athena training young warriors in the courtyard. She corrects one's stance with a flick of her spear. No yelling, just precision. A marble statue of Zeus watches from the far side. Dusty, unnoticed. For all her strength and brilliance, Athena carries herself like someone who's always been alone. Not unloved, just the self-contained. You wonder if she ever longed for a father's affection, or if, born from his skull, she learned early that emotional closeness wasn't going to be part of the deal. Zeus, meanwhile, is recovering in a palace garden, sipping ambrosia through a straw and telling a dryad that the brain birth thing was all part of the plan. The dryad nods politely. A lightning bolt accidentally sets a laurel bush on fire. No one notices. You walk away from Athena's temple with a sense of quiet admiration. She may be the one child Zeus didn't mess up, but only because she never gave him the chance. The aftertaste of Dionysian wine still lingers on your tongue as you stumble gracefully, if a little sideways, back into the marble hallways of Olympus. You think you see a peacock judging you from a balcony, but it might just be a decorative urn. Either way, it's time to visit someone Zeus would very much prefer you not bring up at dinner. Down a staircase draped in silks, through a corridor echoing with the soft clang of jewelry and passive-aggressive sighs, You enter the realm of Helen of Troy's half-brother, music competition judge, and one-time swan impersonator, Helen's father. Well, depending on the version, and also Leda's confused swan suitor. Yes, it's time for the neglected kids. Because for every Athena or Apollo, there are dozens of immortal or half-immortal children of Zeus that history politely sweeps into the corner. Children born to nymphs, mortals, mistresses, and accidental transformations. Children who don't get temples, musical odes, or ambrosia gift baskets. Children like Zagreus, Minos, Harmonia, Helen, and Heracles' lesser-known half-siblings, the honorable mentions in Zeus's grand paternity lineup. You sit on a low stone bench and imagine what the divine family reunion must look like. There's a big welcome progeny, banner, everyone arguing about who mom was, and a confused Cyclops trying to make name tags. Let's start with Zagreus. In some Orphic traditions, he's considered the first Dionysus, born of Zeus and Persephone. Yes, that Persephone. Zeus turns into a serpent, seduces her, and they produce Zagreus, who is promptly torn apart by Titans. Zeus, heartbroken, retrieves the heart and possibly sews it into Semele later to rebirth him as Dionysus. Or maybe it was symbolic. Or a metaphor for wine. Scholars still argue about that one, while quietly pretending it isn't all completely bizarre. Then there's Minos, king of Crete, one of Zeus's mortal sons, and later judge of the dead. Raised to rule, infamous for labyrinths and bad decisions involving bull-headed sons, Minos grew up far from Olympus. No thunderbolts for birthdays. No divine co-parenting. Just politics and the occasional monster problem. Zeus? Rarely mentioned. You pass a mural of Harmonia, daughter of Zeus and Aphrodite, though some say Ares was the father. Either way, she got a cursed necklace as a wedding gift and watched her whole life unravel with impressive tragic efficiency. Zeus's involvement in any of this? Minimal. At best. You pause before a reflective fountain and see the faint image of Helen of Troy shimmering in the water. Sometimes she's said to be the daughter of Zeus and Leda, conceived while Zeus was in swan form, of course. Because nothing says paternal bonding like being hatched from an egg and launched into the most catastrophic war in Greek literature. Zeus's parenting strategy for these children often seems to be cause dramatic conception, disappear for several decades, then maybe intervene if something catches fire. Or not. Depends on the mood. A fringe theory among mythologists is that these myths were less about family values and more about establishing divine lineage in heroes and rulers. If you could trace your bloodline to Zeus, even if he didn't remember your name, you got prestige, temple clout, and probably fewer taxes. But there's a melancholy to it too. Imagine being told your father is the king of the gods and still never getting a seat at the celestial dinner table. You're divine adjacent. Good enough for mythology, not good enough for immortality. You stroll past a quiet garden where statues of lesser-known children stand in mismatched togas. One has a broken nose. Another holds a scroll that reads, unverified. A dryad dusts them occasionally, but avoids eye contact. Zeus walks past, humming a thunderous tune and sipping something fizzy. He glances at the statues, squints, and mutters, "Did I name that one George?" You keep walking. It becomes clear, for all his might and stormy charisma, Zeus was the kind of father who never quite managed to parent beyond the conception phase. His children weren't really raised. They were unleashed, discarded, or occasionally promoted depending on how useful or dramatic their stories became. You pause beneath a fresco of young Heracles punching a lion, and somewhere in the background, Zeus is watching from very far away, behind a curtain. Standard. You find yourself drawn to a quieter corner of Olympus, where the gardens grow in wild, untamed splendor, vines curling like lazy snakes, flowers nodding as if sharing secrets, and the occasional butterfly fluttering with no apparent direction but a lot of purpose. It's here, among this verdant chaos, that you meet Perseus' story, a child of Zeus who proves that sometimes, even terrible parenting can lead to a kind of reluctant success. Perseus' conception is the kind of myth that sounds like the start of a dramatic soap opera. Zeus, ever the wanderer, disguises himself as a golden shower to seduce Danae, a mortal princess locked away in a bronze tower by her father. The tower was supposed to keep her childless forever, but Zeus has other plans. Historians still debate whether the golden shower tale is symbolic of divine intervention, or just a particularly creative way ancient storytellers describe Zeus's charm offensive. A fringe theory even suggests it was an early metaphor for unexpected fertility treatments. But, well, let's stick to mythology for now. Danae soon gives birth to Perseus, but the story isn't over. Her father, furious at the perceived slight and the glowing child, casts mother and son into the sea in a wooden chest. Talk about rough starts. Yet Zeus, the absent father, leaves no footprints in the sand of their survival. Perseus and Danae wash ashore on an island, where they are taken in by a kindly fisherman. Zeus watches from afar, perhaps busy with another tempest or love affair, but he doesn't intervene. Despite the lack of parental guidance, Perseus grows into a hero. Armed with gifts from the gods, like Hermes' winged sandals and Athena's polished shield, he embarks on a quest to slay Medusa, a gorgon with snakes for hair and a gaze that turns people to stone. This quest is as much about survival as it is about proving himself, especially in a family where fatherly warmth is notoriously scarce. You imagine Zeus lounging in Olympus, occasionally hearing tales of Perseus' exploits and mumbling, "That's my boy," sort of. The fascinating part is how Perseus navigates his destiny largely on his own terms. Without Zeus's constant oversight or meddling, he relies on his wit, courage, and the support of other gods who seem more reliable than his absentee father. Some scholars argue that Perseus' story highlights the theme of the self-made hero in Greek mythology, a stark contrast to the heavily involved gods who often meddle in mortal affairs. Others see it as a reflection of Zeus's typical parenting style, present enough to claim credit but distant enough to avoid responsibility. A quirky tidbit, Perseus is said to have used Medusa's severed head as a weapon, turning enemies into stone statues. Some ancient texts even claim he displayed it as a sort of divine trophy, much like a child proudly shows off a school art project. You can almost hear Zeus somewhere in the background asking, "Is that going to be on the quiz?" You watch Perseus return victorious, celebrated by mortals and gods alike. His legacy, despite the rocky start, cements him as one of the greatest heroes in mythology, proof that even without perfect parenting, greatness can bloom. Yet, lurking beneath the tales is the quiet acknowledgement that Zeus's terrible parenting wasn't about neglect alone. It was a complex dance of power, distance, and selective involvement that shaped his children in unpredictable ways. You step away from the tales of heroism, leaving Perseus to his well-earned rest. Somewhere in Olympus, lightning crackles softly, maybe a sign of pride, or maybe Zeus just dropped his fork again. You leave behind the quiet wisdom of Athena's temple and descend a corridor where the marble floor is unusually sticky. It smells faintly of livestock and lyres. A strange buzzing fills the air, not bees exactly, but something sneakier and smaller. At the far end of the hallway, a golden crib rocks itself with suspicious precision. There's a half-eaten tortoise shell nearby, a trail of teeny-tiny winged footprints across the wall, and a note pinned to a cushion that reads, "Do not trust this infant. Meet Hermes. He's 1 day old, and he's already missing." You follow a gentle trail of goat fur and musical notes through the palace gardens. A nymph shrieks overhead as her harp disappears mid-song. A cow bellows in the distance. Somewhere, a rooster lays an egg out of sheer confusion. And there he is, Hermes, the baby god of thieves, travelers, and sarcasm, waddling across a field with 2 stolen cattle and an innocent expression that says, "Who, me?" Zeus has no idea this is happening. Naturally, Hermes is what happens when Zeus forgets to install parental locks on Olympus. Bored of Maya, a quiet mountain nymph who just wanted a peaceful maternity leave, Hermes exits the womb, stretches once, and immediately sets out to cause problems on purpose. He steals Apollo's cattle, invents the lyre from a tortoise shell, hides the evidence under his cradle, and then pretends to be a helpless baby when caught. And it works. Apollo storms into Olympus, sandals dusty, pointing furiously at the newborn god. "He robbed me," he cries. He tied the cow's feet together and walked them backward to confuse the trail. Zeus looks over at the cooing, swaddled baby. Hermes burps. You watch as the king of the gods tries to scold his son and ends up chuckling instead. "He's got spirit," Zeus says, like a proud dad watching his kid get arrested for creative graffiti. He even rewards Hermes with divine status, gives him the role of messenger god, slaps some winged sandals on him. No timeout, no parenting discussion, just nice hustle, son. Historians still argue whether Hermes' rapid rise was meant to reflect Greek admiration for cleverness, or if it was just a mythological shortcut to get a delivery service installed on Olympus. There's also a fringe theory that Zeus was so exhausted by fatherhood at this point that any kid who showed self-sufficiency was immediately promoted to "not my problem." You follow Hermes as he flits from place to place, now fully grown despite being born yesterday, literally. He flirts with dryads, delivers messages, invents dice, and possibly the internet. It's hard to tell. He speaks 12 dialects and 3 bird languages. He can pass through walls and dreams and awkward conversations without breaking a sweat. But for all his speed and humor, there's something lonely in his orbit. He doesn't belong anywhere for long. Not really. No temple home like Athena. No seasonal throne like Dionysus. Just errands. Forever. He's the child who figured out early on that if he didn't make himself useful, he'd vanish into mythological obscurity. So he did what any child of a distracted parent might do. He got loud, got fast, and got clever enough to survive without anyone's help. You stop at a roadside shrine, where a carved statue of Hermes winks cheekily. Offerings of coins, shoes, and feathers sit neatly at its base. A traveler whispers a prayer. A merchant scratches a deal into stone. Hermes is everywhere and nowhere. Always moving. Always just ahead. Zeus, to his credit, occasionally sends him birthday lightning bolts. Whether Hermes notices is unclear. You turn back toward Olympus and hear a small whoosh behind you. A scroll appears in your pocket. It reads, "Thanks for the shout-out. I stole your sandals. Sincerely, Hermes." Of course he did. Back inside Olympus, the storm cloud carpets have been replaced with pine needles. Somewhere off to your left, a bowstring snaps, followed by the unmistakable sound of something, possibly a golden stag, yelping dramatically. You follow the trail through a grove where wildflowers bloom in precise spirals and moonlight lingers even at noon. Welcome to Artemis's domain. It's quiet here. The kind of quiet that says, "I have a dagger, and I'm not afraid to use it." The air smells like fresh earth, wild mint, and mild judgment. You step over a sleeping boar the size of a bathtub and continue toward the sound of arrows thudding into wood. There she is, Artemis, goddess of the hunt, protector of wild animals, and proud daughter of Zeus. She's maybe 12, maybe 20, maybe a concept more than an age. Dressed in silver robes, quiver slung casually across her back, she frowns as one of her followers sneezes too loudly near a deer. You spot Zeus in the distance, trying to pretend he's involved. He's standing behind a tree, muttering something about good form and "that's my girl," but Artemis ignores him. Has been ignoring him for years, actually. That's because when she was just a child, immortal children mature fast, and usually during dramatic events, Artemis marched right up to Zeus, hands on her hips, and demanded eternal virginity, a bow and arrow set just like her brothers, a pack of wild animals to follow her, her own wilderness to rule. Absolutely zero men involved ever. And Zeus, perhaps caught off guard, said yes to everything. Historians still argue whether this moment reflects the strength of Artemis's character or Zeus's guilt for already having like 30 other kids by that point and no emotional availability left. A fringe theory claims he agreed just to avoid another headache birth situation. Either way, Artemis becomes one of the most independent deities on Olympus. She doesn't care about politics or Olympus gossip. She prefers the moonlight, the hunt, and her hand-picked band of fiercely loyal maidens who can shoot a centaur between the eyes at 300 paces. You follow her through the forest, ducking low-hanging vines that seem to shift out of her way and slap anyone else. A lioness pads beside her like a house cat. Artemis pauses to whisper to a sapling, and it grows 3 inches out of sheer respect. She's not hostile to Zeus, just indifferent. She doesn't need him. He gave her what she asked for, then returned to whatever thunderous nonsense he had planned for the afternoon. In return, Artemis carved her own path, far from Olympus's halls and egos. Unlike Hermes, who tried to stand out, or Athena, who earned respect by mastering logic, Artemis simply removed herself from the game. She doesn't compete for attention. She doesn't seek praise. She exists wild, aloof, serene. There's a downside, though. Being the daughter of Zeus often comes with baggage. Artemis is fiercely protective of her privacy, and mortals who violate it tend to end up as stags chased by their own hunting dogs. It's poetic, and mildly horrifying. Zeus occasionally hears about these incidents. His response? A vague shrug and a muttered, "Well, I did say she could have autonomy." You sit beneath a cedar tree and watch Artemis tend to an injured wolf pup. She hums a melody older than time. The moon rises, even though the sun hasn't fully set. The forest obeys her, not out of fear, but reverence. Zeus wanders back into view, holding a poorly carved wooden bow. "I made this for you," he says awkwardly. Artemis looks at it, then at her sleek silver one. "Thanks," she says flatly, and continues bandaging the wolf. The emotional range of their relationship in full. A lesser-known myth says Artemis once saved a mortal child from a plague Zeus accidentally caused. When asked why, she said, "Someone has to look after them." The implication hangs heavy. You rise quietly and walk back toward the palace, leaving Artemis to her moonlit sanctuary. Behind you, a tree blossoms out of season, and a deer nudges a nymph into a shallow creek with surprising affection. You realize Zeus didn't raise Artemis, he released her. Like a wild thing, he never quite understood but couldn't say no to. And in that freedom, she thrived. Somewhere above the clouds, the sun starts glowing with just a little more ego than usual. The rays shimmer gold across Olympus, warming the palace columns like butter on fresh bread. You shield your eyes as a glowing figure descends a staircase that wasn't there 5 seconds ago. Apollo has arrived, and he's bringing his own spotlight. You catch Zeus in the garden pretending to water a tree that definitely doesn't need watering. "That's my boy," he says proudly, then casually throws a lightning bolt at a pomegranate for no reason. Apollo, god of music, prophecy, healing, archery, and whatever else he decided to be this week, grew up fast like most of Zeus's children. But unlike Artemis, his twin sister, Apollo is deeply invested in his father's opinion. He wants praise. He wants recognition. And unfortunately for him, Zeus is wildly inconsistent with both. You follow Apollo to the temple amphitheater, where he's composing an ode to himself. The lyre's strings glow under his fingers. Birds gather. Nymphs swoon. Somewhere, a donkey actually claps. It's all very impressive and completely unnecessary. Apollo's biggest flaw? He tries too hard. Every epic he writes, every arrow he looses, every plague he accidentally unleashes feels like an audition for his father's affection. He's the golden child who desperately wants to be told, "Good job, sport." And Zeus? He's usually too busy dealing with his next divine entanglement to notice. You sit in the back row as Apollo finishes a 10-minute ballad titled, "Father, Can You Hear Me Now?" It ends with a crescendo, so powerful the clouds part in applause. Zeus, who's just arrived with a bowl of olives, nods vaguely and says, "Catchy." Apollo beams like he's won an Emmy. Historians still argue whether Apollo's overachieving nature was meant to reflect Greek ideals of perfection, or just a side effect of divine daddy issues. A fringe myth suggests he once disguised himself as a mortal bard to sneak into Zeus's court and eavesdrop on compliments. It's not all sunshine and singing, though. Apollo is a paradox. He heals plagues but also causes them. He delivers prophecies that no one wants to hear. He tries to seduce mortals who then run screaming into trees. Literally. Looking at you, Daphne. Zeus rarely intervenes in Apollo's more chaotic moments. When the mortal Niobe insults Leto, Apollo's mother, and he responds by slaughtering her children, Zeus says nothing. When Apollo sides with the Trojans, then changes his mind halfway through the war, silence. It's not that Zeus doesn't care. It's more like he assumes Apollo, for all his glittering chaos, can handle himself. And maybe he can. But that doesn't stop him from trying to impress a father who always seems a little too distracted. You wander into Apollo's temple, where golden statues glow with supernatural radiance. Each one captures him in a different pose, playing the lyre, pulling a bow, dramatically holding a laurel wreath like it's a mirror. A priest bows and offers you a scroll. It's blank, but glows faintly. "Just hold it near your ear," he whispers. You do. It sings. It sings of sunrises, poetry, and longing. And somewhere in the background, soft refrain. "Dad, did you see that?" Zeus walks past the temple door, tosses in a handful of coins, and says, "Buy yourself something nice." Then continues on to inspect a thunderbolt tree that may or may not be sentient. Apollo, perched on a roof, sighs. Then starts composing a new melody called Eclipsed by Thunder. There's something beautiful and bittersweet in it. Apollo, with all his radiance, still chasing approval from a father who gives it out like coupons, rarely and often by accident. You head back down the golden path, past sunflowers that lean toward you like loyal fans. The warmth lingers on your skin, but you can't help feeling that for all his light, Apollo spends most of his time casting his own shadow, just trying to catch Zeus's. You wander toward the quiet end of the divine corridor, where the air thickens with the scent of fresh earth and faded legends. Here, you find one of Zeus's most famous yet profoundly misunderstood children, Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger, trickster, and god of transitions. Hermes' origin story starts with his mother, Maia, one of the Pleiades, a nymph known more for her discretion than for throwing wild parties like some Olympians. She gives birth to Hermes in a cave far from Olympus, away from the usual thunder and lightning fanfare. Within hours of birth, Hermes is already up to something. The newborn god famously steals Apollo's prized cattle, invents the lyre from a tortoise shell, and vanishes without a trace, all before Zeus even has a chance to finish his morning coffee. You picture baby Hermes, cheeky and clever, hiding footprints and inventing new ways to confuse his siblings. Even as an infant, his penchant for mischief sets him apart, qualities that earn a mix of amusement and exasperation from the Olympian family. Historians still argue whether Hermes' early exploits symbolize the cunning and adaptability valued by the ancient Greeks, or if they're simply entertaining cautionary tales about clever kids with sticky fingers. A fringe view suggests that Hermes embodies the chaotic energy of adolescence, eternally stuck between childhood and adulthood. Zeus, true to form, barely intervenes. Instead, he tends to let Hermes run his course, perhaps seeing in him the perfect balance of irreverence and usefulness. After all, Hermes becomes the messenger of the gods, a vital role requiring quick wit, diplomacy, and a healthy disregard for protocol. You follow Hermes as he zips between realms, Olympus, Earth, the underworld, delivering messages, guiding souls, and occasionally leading wayward travelers astray just for laughs. His winged sandals barely touch the clouds, leaving trails of laughter and mild confusion. An amusing detail, Hermes is also the god of boundaries and thieves. His dual role reflects the liminal spaces he inhabits, between mortal and divine, lawful and unlawful, light and shadow. Ancient festivals honored him with playful thefts and raucous celebrations, a nod to his unpredictable spirit. Despite his antics, Hermes is fiercely loyal to his family. He often acts as Zeus's eyes and ears, smoothing over disputes and carrying secret messages. Yet, like many of Zeus's children, he operates with a curious independence, making choices without consulting his father. You pause by a statue of Hermes holding a caduceus, a staff entwined with serpents that later became a symbol of medicine and commerce. It's an ironic twist, the trickster's tool becoming a universal emblem of healing and negotiation. Zeus watches Hermes from a distance, a rare smile flickering across his thunderous features. Perhaps for once, the unpredictable child has earned some genuine pride. You leave Hermes bustling about, his laughter echoing softly like the rustle of wings, a reminder that even in a family as chaotic as Zeus's, there's room for cleverness, adaptability, and a little harmless trouble. You smell the party before you see it. The scent of crushed grapes, wild roses, and questionable decisions drifts through Olympus like perfume from a festival long overstayed. You follow the sound of tambourines, soft laughter, and the occasional goat bleat down a vine-wrapped corridor that seems to sway under your feet. Congratulations, you've reached Dionysus's wing of the family tree. There, in a pavilion made of ivy and starlight, celebration is in full swing. Satyrs dance badly. Nymphs twirl like wind-blown petals. A donkey in a toga recites poetry no one understands. And at the center of it all sits Dionysus, reclining like he invented reclining, sipping wine from a goblet shaped like a pomegranate. Zeus's son. Sort of. You see, Dionysus's origin story is the mythological version of It's Complicated. His mother, Semele, was a mortal woman who made the bold mistake of asking Zeus to reveal himself in full divine form. Spoiler, humans don't survive that kind of flex. She disintegrated faster than a New Year's resolution. But she was pregnant, carrying Dionysus. So Zeus, in a move no parenting book recommends, sewed the fetus into his own thigh. 9 months later, or maybe just one thunderstorm later, the myths aren't clear, he popped the baby out and declared, "Here's my son, born from my leg." Totally normal. Historians still argue whether this thigh birth was symbolic, dramatic, or just the ancient world's strangest dad joke. A fringe myth suggests Zeus picked the thigh because his stomach was still full from eating Métis. Whatever the case, Zeus now had a child made of chaos, grapes, and confusion. But instead of raising Dionysus on Olympus, Zeus did what he often did best: delegated. He handed the kid over to nymphs, satyrs, and some very patient mountain folk, telling them, just keep him away from Hera. Because Hera, Zeus's wife, was not amused. Every time she remembered her husband had a child with someone else again, she tried to erase the evidence. Some myths say she drove Dionysus mad. Others say she sent assassins. One version has her turning his teachers into constellations just for fun. So Dionysus grew up hiding, raised in forests, caves, and vine-covered hideouts, surrounded by mortals, beasts, and wine. When he got older, he decided not to return to Olympus immediately. Instead, he wandered the world, teaching people how to party like gods and turn water into wine, which is, frankly, very efficient. You watch as Dionysus raises his glass and toasts no one in particular. A leopard yawns at his feet. A woman with grapevines for hair sings lullabies to a tree. It's part circus, part opera, part breakdown in divine order. Zeus occasionally checks in, usually by sending a lightning bolt that opens a new wine cellar. He seems fond of Dionysus, but in a cool nephew kind of way, not a deeply involved parenting sense. Once he even crowned him an official Olympian, which was Zeus's way of saying, oops, you're real. Come on up. There's a moment of strange tenderness, though hidden in a lesser-known tale. When Dionysus tried to rescue his mortal mother's soul from the underworld, Zeus actually helped. Quietly. No fanfare. Just a rare favor for a child who grew up mostly without him. And yet, even now, Dionysus doesn't seem to crave his father's approval. He's too busy dancing, creating, occasionally turning mortals into dolphins. His version of existence isn't about hierarchy. It's about liberation, wildness, theater, joy with a sharp edge. You slip into the crowd, and someone hands you a cup of wine that tastes like nostalgia and laughter. Dionysus catches your eye and winks. You're not sure if he's seeing you or a vision of your secret regrets, but either way, you feel oddly welcomed. The music slows. The stars blink. The satyr falls asleep hugging a watermelon. In this bizarre carnival of immortality, Dionysus thrives without a real family. And maybe that's the point. He made his own. The hallway darkens as you move deeper into Olympus, not ominously, just theatrically. Think moody lighting, slight drop in temperature, and the faint scent of lavender, parchment, and sarcasm. You know that feeling when someone's been quiet too long, you suddenly remember they're incredibly powerful. That's the vibe. You're approaching Hades' side of the family. Technically, Hades isn't Zeus's child, he's his brother, but here's the twist. Zeus's terrible parenting doesn't stop at his own kids. Sometimes, it spirals outward like a poorly planned family barbecue that ends with someone summoning a chariot of the dead. Because even when Zeus isn't the father, he's usually the problem. You step into the underworld, not through a terrifying pit, but through a very polite vestibule with surprisingly well-organized paperwork. There's a front desk. Cerberus, the three-headed dog, is asleep under it. Each head is snoring on a different rhythm. It's adorable. Hades is in his office. Black robes, bone jewelry, and a scowl that suggests someone just rearranged his bookshelf alphabetically instead of thematically. He doesn't look up as you enter. He's reviewing a list titled Soul Zeus should probably be responsible for. Topping that list? Persephone. Now, Persephone isn't Zeus's daughter in every version of the myth, but in some, yes. Which makes what's about to unfold extremely awkward. Zeus, as always, tries to multitask fatherhood with world domination. So when Hades approaches him and says, "Hey brother, I'd like a queen," Zeus doesn't offer advice or introduce eligible goddesses. Instead, he points at his daughter and says essentially, "Sure, take Persephone." No warning. No heads up. No talk with Persephone herself. Just divine backroom deals and poor intergenerational communication. Next thing you know, the earth splits open, Hades rises in a chariot of shadows, and Persephone gets abducted into marriage, kidnapping, or divine arrangement. Historians still argue, uncomfortably. A fringe theory says the whole event was a metaphor for agricultural cycles, but also, yikes. Demeter, Persephone's mother and Zeus's sister, is furious. She storms Olympus, tears apart fields, withholds crops, and threatens to turn the entire mortal world into a permanent winter. Zeus, seeing his mistake crop up in global famine, finally decides to intervene. His solution? Sort of share custody. Persephone spends half the year in the underworld with Hades and half above ground with Demeter. Everyone pretends this is a compromise, but you can hear the emotional whiplash from here. You glance over at Zeus, who's polishing a lightning bolt nearby and whistling like he didn't just invent the first mythological custody battle. When asked about it later, he mutters something about strengthening seasonal myths and changes the subject to cloud formations. In the underworld, Persephone is adjusting. She wears a crown made of obsidian and pomegranate seeds. Her throne is half marble, half moss. She looks tired but regal, like someone who didn't ask to be here but refuses to be anyone's victim. There's a quiet moment between her and Hades that feels less awful than expected. Not romanticized, but respectful. At least someone's learning emotional nuance down here. Still, you can't help but wonder what kind of support she might have had if Zeus had actually parented instead of delegating. If he'd said, "No, she deserves a choice," or at the very least, "Let's not traumatize everyone." You walk past a wall of river maps, Styx, Lethe, Acheron, and spot a dusty portrait of Persephone as a child, picking flowers. Zeus's handwriting is on the back. "Remind me to send nectar on her birthday." It's unsent. You leave the underworld through a tunnel of glowing roots. Cerberus waves a sleepy paw goodbye. The air grows warmer as you ascend, but the mood stays heavy. Zeus didn't parent Persephone. He traded her. And while she carved power from what she was given, the echoes of that choice still ripple through the myth like cold water under a cracked door. You emerge back into Olympus with a quiet question tugging at your thoughts. What happens to the children of gods when the gods don't care enough to raise them? Zeus, at that moment, is trying to make pancakes out of lightning. He doesn't notice you watching. The scent of ozone clings faintly to your clothes as you walk back into the more domesticated wing of Olympus, if such a thing exists in a palace made of clouds, crystal, and dramatic emotional avoidance. Statues blink when you're not looking. Mosaics rearrange themselves slightly to improve their symmetry. And somewhere above you, a harp sighs in frustration after being ghost-played for the 5th time today. You're heading toward what should have been Zeus's greatest success story. His chance to actually parent, lovingly, consistently, responsibly. Instead, you find Hephaestus. Now, Hephaestus isn't just one of Zeus's children. He's also Hera's son. And depending on which myth you follow, that's where the trouble starts. Some versions claim that Hera, angry that Zeus gave birth to Athena all on his own, decided to have a child without him, just out of sheer divine pettiness. So she creates Hephaestus alone. No Zeus involved. Sort of a my womb, my rules situation. But then Hephaestus is born, and he's not perfect. He's not glowing like Apollo, not dashing like Hermes. He's described as lame, awkward, and lacking the glossy polish that Olympus seemed to expect from its gods. So what do his parents do? They throw him off a mountain. Literally. Zeus and or Hera, depending on the version, look at their newborn son and say, "Nope," and yeet him straight down to earth like a divine reject. Historians still argue over whether this act was symbolic of artistic suffering, a warning against vanity, or just ancient Greek cruelty disguised as myth. A fringe theory says it was the first documented case of aesthetic parenting, where your value is judged by how photogenic your divine glow is. But Hephaestus doesn't die. Instead, he lands, painfully, and is rescued by kind sea nymphs who raise him in an undersea grotto. He grows up working with fire, metal, and invention. No palace. No royal parenting. Just hammers, anvils, and the quiet company of waves. By the time Olympus remembers him, he's no longer the rejected child. They want him back. Because Hephaestus, despite everything, becomes the god of the forge, the divine blacksmith. He builds palaces, weapons, thrones, and jewelry that make Mount Olympus sparkle. The place practically runs on his designs. So Zeus invites him back. Sort of. Some myths suggest he's bribed. Others say he builds a throne that traps Hera and only agrees to free her if they apologize. Which they do. In the most awkward family reunion imaginable. You pause at his workshop, tucked away behind a curtain of volcanic steam. The walls hum with energy. Golden gears turn in endless silence. A mechanical owl blinks at you, then nods approvingly. Hephaestus is here, alone as usual. His hands are covered in soot, His face is focused. A bronze statue of Zeus with a removable nose stands off to one side. You suspect it was a stress project. He doesn't talk about the mountain. Doesn't bring up the rejection. He simply builds, creates, reinvents himself again and again. You can't help but wonder how different things might have been if Zeus or Hera had chosen to nurture instead of discard, to teach instead of judge. But maybe then, Olympus wouldn't have its greatest craftsmen. Maybe suffering forged something beautiful. Hephaestus never becomes his father's favorite, never courts the spotlight. But Olympus depends on him more than any other child Zeus ever half-raised. His gifts are silent, sturdy, eternal. You watch him place a glowing ingot into a mold. It hisses. Sparks rise. And for just a moment, it looks like the fire is smiling. Then you step quietly out of the forge, leaving Hephaestus to his work. Zeus passes by, whistling off-key, holding a trident he definitely didn't make himself. Hephaestus doesn't look up. You find yourself drifting toward the quieter edges of Olympus, where the air hums with the muted sounds of forgotten stories and overlooked children. Among these shadows is the tale of Alcmene, a mortal woman whose encounter with Zeus resulted in one of the most famous heroes of Greek mythology, Heracles. Alcmene's story begins with loyalty and love for her mortal husband, Amphitryon. One night, while Amphitryon is away, Zeus decides to pay a visit, disguised, of course. He takes Amphitryon's form and spends the night with Alcmene, who remains unaware of the deception. This night results in the conception of Heracles. You can almost hear the dramatic tension ripple through the god's grapevine. Hera, Zeus's wife, is furious, not just because of the affair, but because Heracles threatens her own divine plans. She spends much of Heracles' life trying to thwart him, from sending snakes to his crib to inducing bouts of madness. Zeus's approach to fatherhood here is, to put it gently, hands off with a side of inconvenience. He's proud of Heracles' strength and heroism, but largely lets Hera's vendettas shape the boy's life. You imagine Alcmene, caught between devotion to her husband and the chaos wrought by Zeus's involvement. Her story is one of resilience amid divine drama, a mortal's attempt to navigate the whims of gods with limited success. Historians still debate whether Heracles' myth served as a way to explain the human struggle with fate and suffering, or as a glorification of physical strength and endurance. A fringe perspective even suggests the labors symbolize the transition from barbarism to civilization. Heracles grows into a figure both celebrated and tragic, embodying the consequences of Zeus's indirect, often problematic parenting. His feats are legendary, but his life is marked by turmoil, much of it stemming from the divine family's dysfunction. Zeus watches from afar, occasionally sending a lightning bolt of encouragement or conveniently forgetting to intervene during crises. It's a parental style that leaves much to be desired but somehow produces mythic results. You step away from Alcmene's tale, the echoes of Heracles' labors lingering like distant thunder. The story is a reminder that even the greatest heroes can emerge from the most tangled family trees. Somewhere between the faded constellations and the soft murmur of godly gossip, you find yourself standing before the last of Zeus's long list of children, the ones who didn't quite make it into legend, whose stories were half-whispered, folded between scrolls, or vanished entirely when temples crumbled and poets moved on to more dramatic subjects. There's Angelus, a daughter whose name echoes faintly in some late Orphic hymns. Said to be the child of Zeus and an unknown deity, perhaps Gaia, perhaps an obscure nymph, she was raised in secret, hidden from Olympus. She eventually fled to the underworld, where Hades gave her a role among the shadows. Some sources suggest she became a goddess of messages between realms, a sisterly echo of Hermes, but darker, quieter. Zeus never looked for her. Never called. You step past statues worn smooth by time, gods with no temples, daughters with no hymns. There's Cytheron, a demigod's son whose name is now only remembered as the name of a mountain. His myth was swallowed by the land. You imagine him wandering the slopes, wondering whether his father would ever notice his prayers. And then there's Thebe, another daughter of Zeus. Yes, the same Thebe who gave her name to the city of Thebes. In some versions, she's a proud city founder. In others, she's just a pawn in a marriage alliance. Zeus likely never attended her wedding. Probably forgot her birthday. But her name lived on in brick and legend. Cities, at least, remember things fathers forget. Historians still argue whether these lesser-known children were once more prominent in regional myths, or if they were always minor footnotes, inserted to explain a mountain's name, a town's origin, or a hero's lineage. A fringe idea suggests they were symbolic placeholders, divine acknowledgments that for every child the gods celebrated, there were dozens more left behind in the margins. You pause in front of a cracked relief where nameless figures stand hand in hand. It's labeled the others. No powers listed. No feats achieved. Just an ancient attempt to admit that divinity, like any monarchy, leaves people behind. And what do you make of Zeus now? He wasn't the world's worst father out of malice, but out of indifference. Too busy chasing thunder, ambition, and personal glory to raise the children he left scattered across Greece and beyond. His legacy is grand, yes, but also fragmented. A constellation of bright and broken stories, told by children who either made themselves known or quietly vanished into myth. As you turn to leave this final quiet room of Olympus, you hear the faintest crack of distant thunder, soft this time, almost apologetic. Or maybe it's just the sky stretching. Either way, you know this much: Zeus fathered many, but raised few. And it was often in the absence of his love that his children, forgotten, rejected, or ignored, found their strange, resilient power. And now you pause. The halls of Olympus fall still, the echo of divine drama softening into silence. The thunder fades into distant rumblings, no longer crashing, just murmuring like the low hush of waves far from shore. The stories you've wandered through, the children of lightning, of clouds and chaos, of stolen glances and secret births, have all drifted back to their mythic corners. Their laughter, their sorrow, their strange, starbound destinies are now folded neatly behind gauzy curtains of sleep. The air is cooler here, softer, like someone turned down the volume on the cosmos. You sit for a moment beneath an olive tree that was never planted but has always grown in the minds of storytellers. Its silver-green leaves rustle without wind. You lean your head against its ancient bark and you realize something. Even gods stumble. Even immortals forget birthdays, lose patience, or miss the point entirely. And yet a life continues. Heroes rise. Cities bloom. Myths whisper. And somewhere in the sky, a tired old storm god closes his eyes, just for a little while. You exhale. Let the tension drain from your shoulders. Let the weight of the thunderbolts fall from your hands. Let your breath settle into that long, slow rhythm that carries you gently down, like a boat untethered from its dock. There's no need to solve anything now. No need to chase the end of any tale. You've walked among myths tonight. You've seen the cracks in marble and the light behind it. You've wandered with gods and sat beside forgotten names. Now all that's left is rest. So breathe, drift, and sleep,